My name is Margaret Sullivan, and the day I discovered the truth was the day my unborn child kicked for the very first time. I remember standing in the kitchen of our little house on Maple Street, one hand pressed to my belly, the other gripping a crumpled receipt that didn't belong in my husband's pocket. It wasn't for groceries or hardware or anything that fit our life. It was for a cheap motel just outside of town. The date on it burned into my eyes. It was the same night Tom swore he had been working late. That was the night my best friend Linda had called to check in on me, her voice soft, almost too gentle, while my husband never came home until after midnight. I knew then that something was wrong, terribly wrong. But I wasn't prepared for how deep the betrayal ran. To tell you how I reached that moment, I need to take you back a little. For most of my life, I believed in small-town truths, that people meant what they said, that best friends were for life, and that marriage was a sacred promise. I grew up in Indiana, where neighbors brought over casseroles when someone was sick, and where the church bells on Sunday morning were as regular as the sunrise. It was the kind of place where everybody seemed to know everybody, and secrets didn't stay hidden long, at least that's what I used to think. Linda and I had known each other since we were kids. She lived 2 houses down, and we grew up sharing bicycles, homework, and secrets whispered late into the night during sleepovers. She stood beside me at my wedding to Tom, her smile bright as I said my vows. To me, she wasn't just a friend, she was family. The kind of family you choose. And Tom, he was steady, reliable. A man who worked with his hands and brought home a paycheck every Friday. He wasn't the most exciting man, but after years of watching friends get burned by charming talkers, I thought steady was exactly what I needed. Together, they were the 2 people I trusted most in the world. When I found out I was pregnant, I felt like the universe had finally given me the gift I'd been praying for. I wasn't young anymore. At 39, I worried my time might have passed. But when the doctor confirmed it, I remember crying in the parking lot, clutching the ultrasound picture to my chest. Tom hugged me that day, told me everything was going to change for the better. Linda cried too when I shared the news, pulling me into a hug and whispering how she'd be there every step of the way. Looking back now, those words feel like knives. The first signs were so small, I nearly missed them. Tom started staying later at work, saying the company had taken on bigger projects. He came home tired, distracted, sometimes smelling of a cologne I didn't recognize. Linda, on the other hand, seemed to be around more than ever. She showed up with soup when I had morning sickness, offered to drive me to appointments, even folded my laundry while chatting away about the neighbors. At first, I thought I was lucky. How many women had a best friend like that? Someone who cared so much. But sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, I caught her staring off her face, soft with a smile that wasn't meant for me. And Tom. He grew quiet around me, but when Linda stopped by, his eyes lit up. A flicker barely there, but I saw it. My mother used to say, "Pay attention to the little things, they'll tell you the whole story." I should have listened sooner. One night, after a long day, Tom came home late again. He dropped his jacket on the chair, kissed me quickly, and muttered something about traffic. But when I picked up the jacket to hang it, the receipt slipped out. That motel, seedy, cheap. The kind of place married couples in love never had any reason to visit. My heart sank, but denial is a strong drug. I told myself maybe he met a coworker there for a quick drink. Maybe there was another explanation. I wanted so badly to believe that. But in my gut, I knew. I barely slept that night. I lay awake, one hand on my belly, listening to Tom's soft snores beside me, wondering how I could confront him, if I even dared. The thought of being alone, of raising a baby without him, terrified me. And the thought of accusing him, what if I was wrong? What if I destroyed our marriage over nothing? The voices of doubt circled me like vultures, picking apart every shred of confidence I had. The next day, Linda came by with a pie she claimed she'd baked just for me. She sat at my kitchen table laughing about something the pastor's wife had done, while I forced smiles. I couldn't stop staring at her hands, the way she smoothed her hair, the way she avoided looking me in the eye for too long. I thought of that motel receipt burning a hole in my pocket and wanted to scream. Instead, I cut us each a slice of pie and listened as she talked, wondering how long she'd been lying to me. I know now that betrayal doesn't come like thunder. It creeps in slowly, softly, until one day it roars so loudly you can't ignore it. For me, the roar was that piece of paper proof that something was broken in my world. And though I didn't know how bad it was yet, I could feel the ground shifting under my feet. Something inside me whispered that the people I trusted most were wearing masks, and sooner or later, those masks were going to fall. But I wasn't ready to face the truth yet. Not then. I folded that receipt, tucked it deep in my dresser drawer, and told myself I'd find the right moment. Little did I know the right moment was already racing toward me faster than I could imagine. And when it came, it would change everything. The days after I tucked that motel receipt away felt longer than any I'd ever lived. My house, once warm and familiar, suddenly seemed filled with shadows. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator felt heavier, like they were carrying secrets I couldn't see. I kept telling myself to wait to watch to be sure. But the truth doesn't like to stay hidden. It leaks out in small ways like water through a cracked pipe until the whole thing bursts. Tom grew more distracted with each passing week. He used to come home and ask about my day, rub my shoulders when my back ached, or talk about baby names. Now he dropped his keys on the counter, muttered a few words about work, and buried himself in his phone. Sometimes he'd go outside pacing on the porch while he took calls in a low voice. When I asked who it was, he'd shrug and say it was a coworker. His eyes never met mine. Linda, on the other hand, was everywhere. She came by with casseroles, little baby outfits, even magazines about parenting that she thought I might like. At first, her presence was comforting, but the more she showed up, the more uneasy I felt. She had an answer for everything, a smile ready at any moment, and a way of slipping into my life as if it were her own. I caught her once standing in the nursery. I was preparing, running her hand along the crib rail, like it belonged to her. When I walked in, she jumped, laughed it off, and said she was just imagining what it would look like once the baby arrived. The women at church kept telling me how lucky I was. "Margaret, you have the sweetest friend," they'd say, patting my arm. "And Tom, what a hard worker. You've got a good man there." I smiled and nodded, but inside their words twisted like a knife. If only they knew. One afternoon, I decided to surprise Tom at his job. He worked construction, and I thought maybe bringing him lunch would cheer him up. When I got there, his co-workers looked confused. One of them said Tom had taken off early. My heart sank, but I kept my face steady, thanking them before driving away. On the way home, I passed Linda's car parked near that same old motel. My chest tightened, my hands trembling on the wheel. I didn't stop, though. I drove home, sat in the driveway for nearly an hour, and cried until I couldn't breathe. I tried to talk to Tom that night. I asked him if something was wrong, if maybe the stress of the baby and work was too much. He waved me off, kissed my forehead, and told me not to worry. But his words felt empty, rehearsed. He smelled faintly of perfume again, not mine. The tension was eating me alive. I began waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was going crazy. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. When something feels wrong, it usually is. I wanted to believe I was wrong, that hormones and fear were making me paranoid. But the seed of doubt had already taken root. One Sunday after service, Linda pulled me aside. She insisted Tom was working too hard, that I needed to take better care of myself. Her hand rested a second too long on my shoulder, her eyes too gentle. It was the kind of gentleness that wasn't meant for me. And in that moment, I saw it, the look that flickered across her face whenever she spoke his name. I started noticing more. The way Tom smiled when his phone buzzed, the way he leaned toward the screen, like it was whispering secrets to him. The way Linda avoided talking about her own husband, steering every conversation back toward me. Tom and the baby. They thought they were careful, but small-town life doesn't let much slip by. Even Mrs. Parker, my neighbor 2 doors down, mentioned seeing Tom's truck parked out late. She laughed, said maybe he was planning a surprise for me. I forced a laugh too, but inside my stomach turned. The baby shower was the final straw. Linda offered to host it, insisting it would take the pressure off me. She decorated the fellowship hall with streamers and balloons, made little sandwiches, and even ordered a cake with "Welcome Baby Sullivan" written in blue icing. Everyone said it was perfect. I stood there smiling for pictures, opening gifts and thanking people, but my heart was stone. Every time I looked at Linda, all I saw was that motel receipt, that parked car. That smile meant for someone else. That night, after everyone left, I sat on the edge of the bed holding a tiny onesie. Tom came in, kissed my cheek, and told me how beautiful the shower had been. I asked him if he had something to tell me, anything at all. He froze for a split second, then laughed, pulling me into a hug. "You worry too much, Margaret," he said softly. But I could feel his heart racing against my shoulder. I knew then that the truth wasn't just in my head. It was out there, real and ugly, waiting for me to uncover it. The unease that had followed me for weeks hardened into resolve. I wasn't going to wait for the truth to find me. I was going to hunt it down. And when I did, it wouldn't just change my marriage. It would change everything. I waited until the shadows grew long one evening, the kind of summer night when the cicadas hummed loud enough to cover a person's thoughts. Tom had said he'd be late again, another emergency at work. I kissed him goodbye. At the door, nodded like a dutiful wife, and then 10 minutes later, I slipped into my car and followed. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might shake the steering wheel loose. Every streetlight seemed to spotlight me. Every passing car felt like an accusation. But I kept driving, my hands trembling, my eyes locked on the red glow of his taillights in the distance. He didn't go to work. He didn't even head in that direction. Instead, he turned onto the old highway, the one that led straight toward the edge of town, where the cheap motels and roadside diners lined the road. My stomach dropped. I pressed harder on the gas, keeping just enough distance so he wouldn't notice. And then I saw it, his truck pulling into the lot of the same run-down motel printed on that receipt. I parked 2 blocks away and walked every step heavy, as if my feet were made of stone. The neon sign flickered above the office window, buzzing faintly in the night air. I stayed hidden behind a row of overgrown bushes, my breath shallow, my palms damp with sweat. Minutes passed, and then I saw her. Linda. My Linda. She stepped out of her car like she'd done it 100 times before, her hair, brushed, her dress casual but neat, the kind you wear when you want to be noticed without looking like you tried. She glanced around once, then hurried toward Tom's truck. When he got out, The sight hit me like a fist. Tom wasn't the tired, overworked husband I'd been living with. He looked alive, eager. He smiled in a way he hadn't smiled at me in months. And then, right there under the neon glow, he kissed her. Not a quick hello, not a mistake. A kiss full of familiarity of history. My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the branches in front of me, trying not to cry out. The pain was sharp, like glass slicing through my chest. It wasn't just my husband's lips on hers. It was every memory, every laugh, every Sunday dinner we'd shared as friends. It was Linda standing beside me at my wedding. It was her hand on my shoulder at the baby shower. It was every time she said, "I'll always be here for you," while stealing the one thing I thought was mine. I wanted to rush out, to scream, to drag them both into the street and make them face me. But I couldn't. Not yet. My baby shifted inside me, a little kick, a reminder that I couldn't let rage destroy me now. I had to be careful. I had to think. So I stayed quiet and watched as they walked inside together. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped my phone when I lifted it to snap a picture of Tom's truck in the lot. Proof. My heart screamed for more, but my body was frozen, too afraid I might faint if I pushed any further. When I finally drove home, the world looked different. The street I'd lived on for years felt colder, the houses unfamiliar. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the dark, gripping the steering wheel. Tears ran down my face, hot and endless. For a long time, I hated myself for not storming in there, for not tearing the truth into the open. But as I sat there, I realized this wasn't about one explosive moment. It was about survival, about protecting myself and my child. The next morning, Tom came home with his hair mussed and his shirt wrinkled. He kissed my cheek, told me he'd been working late, and poured himself a cup of coffee. His voice was smooth, practiced, as if lying to me had become second nature. I stared at him over my mug, wondering if he could see the storm in my eyes. But he didn't. He didn't even notice. And Linda. She showed up 2 days later with a bag of baby blankets she claimed she'd sewn herself. She smiled, asked how I was feeling, and touched my belly as if she had the right. I forced a smile back my throat, burning with unshed words. She laughed about something trivial, but I saw the truth in her eyes now. It was there, naked and cruel, no matter how much she tried to cover it. From that day on, I started collecting pieces. Little things. Notes in Tom's pockets. Times he claimed to be working late but wasn't. Times Linda's husband mentioned she was out with friends. I saved receipts, scribbled down dates, even asked a neighbor to keep an eye out when Tom's truck wasn't where it should have been. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing. But every night when I lay down and felt my child shift inside me, I whispered promises. "I'll protect you," I said, softly, stroking my belly. "You'll never grow up thinking lies are love." My anger wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the life I was carrying, the life they'd already betrayed. Betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it rewrites the way you see the world. The park where we picnicked felt haunted. The pew where Linda and I once knelt side by side felt poisoned. Even the walls of my own home seemed to echo with their laughter. But I held myself together piece by piece, knowing that when the time came, their lies would no longer hide behind masks, and I would be the one to tear those masks away. The days after that night felt like living in a house built on sand. Nothing was steady anymore. I woke up each morning next to Tom, watching him tie his boots, watching him sip his coffee, and all I could see was the man in that motel parking lot. The man who laughed and kissed another woman like he belonged to her. And Linda, my so-called friend, She continued to stop by with casseroles and baby advice, her smile painted on her hands, reaching for my belly, as if she were part of this child's story. Every touch made my skin crawl. I didn't confront them right away. The old Margaret, the one who trusted too easily, might have. But I wasn't her anymore. I was quieter now, sharper. I carried my anger like a hidden blade. I knew if I lashed out without proof, they'd deny it, twist it, make me seem hysterical. No, I needed them to trap themselves in their own lies. So I began to plan. It started small. I tucked the photo of Tom's truck at the motel into a manila folder and slipped it under a stack of bills. Then I began keeping a little notebook. Dates, times, excuses. Every late night at work, every girls' night out, Linda mentioned to her husband. I listened carefully at church potlucks, scribbling down anything that sounded off. People in small towns talk without realizing how much they reveal. Meanwhile, Tom grew bolder. He started showering immediately when he got home, as if scrubbing away the truth. He smiled less, spoke less, but when his phone buzzed, I caught the flicker in his eyes. I knew who it was. I always knew. Linda, too, grew sloppy. At the grocery store, I spotted her buying Tom's favorite brand of aftershave. At the baby shower, I caught the way she looked at him when she thought I was distracted, opening gifts. It wasn't the look of a friend. It was hunger possession. And everyone else was blind to it. That baby shower still burns in my memory. She stood there, basking in the compliments as if she were the perfect hostess, the perfect friend. She told everyone how she had been there for me through morning sickness, how she planned to be like an aunt to my child. The audacity nearly choked me. But I smiled for the camera posed with the cake and let them all believe her. Because I knew the truth, and soon enough, so would they. At home, I practiced calm. I looked Tom in the eyes when he lied to me, and I nodded as if I believed him. I let Linda hug me, let her whisper empty promises, and I hugged her back. All the while, I was building my case. Every receipt, every note, every observation. I was weaving a net around them, one they wouldn't be able to escape. But it wasn't just about exposing them. It was about surviving them. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake with one hand on my belly, whispering to my unborn child that we would be okay, that Mama was stronger than they knew, that betrayal wouldn't be the end of us. Sometimes I cried so hard I thought the baby must feel it, but then a little kick would remind me I had a reason to keep going. And in those quiet, broken hours, I made a promise to myself I would not be destroyed. I would not let their lies define my future. I would rise from this wreckage stronger, wiser, and unbroken. The Sunday after the shower, Linda stopped by with leftovers. She stood in my kitchen, leaning against the counter like she owned the place, and laughed about something Tom had said at church. It was too easy, too natural the way she said his name. I caught her eyes, and for the first time I didn't look away. I let her see the steel in mine. She blinked, faltered for just a second, then pasted her smile back on. But I saw it, the fear that maybe I knew. I did know, and soon she would know just how much. That night, as Tom drifted off to sleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. My whole life had been built around trust, trust in my husband, trust in my best friend. Now that foundation was gone, shattered. But in its place, something new was being built. Something stronger. I realized then that I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to rise above it. I was going to make them face what they had done, not in whispers, not in private, but out in the open, where their masks would be torn away. I closed my eyes, rested a hand on my belly, and whispered to my child, "They think they've broken me, but they don't know who I really am. They don't know what I'm capable of. And for the first time in weeks, I felt peace. Not because the pain was gone, it wasn't, but because I had found my purpose. I knew that if I wanted to tear away their masks, I couldn't do it in the dark. Secrets had lived in the shadows long enough, feeding off my silence. If there was one thing small-town life had taught me, it was that truth only carried weight when it was spoken out loud in front of the people who mattered. So I began to plan something they couldn't run from, something they couldn't twist into another lie. It started with a dinner invitation. I told Tom I wanted to host a Sunday meal just like we used to, before life grew so hectic. I made it sound innocent, nostalgic, even like a chance for family and friends to come together and celebrate the baby's arrival. Tom hesitated at first, shifting his eyes, but in the end, he agreed. He even smiled like it was the most ordinary request in the world. I knew better. I sent invitations to both sides of the family, Tom's mother and siblings, my brother and his wife, and yes, even Linda and her husband. When Linda received the call, her voice perked up, almost too cheerful. She promised to bring her famous green bean casserole. I thanked her sweetly, though bile burned at the back of my throat. The week leading up to that dinner was the longest of my life. Every night I checked the folder hidden under my dresser, the one where I'd stored everything: photos, receipts, notes. Each piece was small on its own, but together they told a story too strong to deny. I imagined their faces when the truth came out, the silence that would hang in the air like smoke after a fire. On Sunday, I woke early. The air smelled of rain, though the sky was clear. I set the table with my grandmother's dishes, the ones I usually saved for holidays. A roast slow cooked in the oven, filling the house with an aroma that made my stomach turn. Every movement felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if I were preparing not just a meal, but a reckoning. When the doorbell rang, my heart skipped. Tom's mother came first, carrying a basket of cornbread. She hugged me tightly, her eyes soft with pride. "You're glowing, Margaret," she whispered. If only she knew. Soon after, my brother and his wife arrived, their voices filling the house with laughter. Linda and her husband came last. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, her smile wide and bright. She hugged me like nothing was wrong, like she wasn't about to be stripped bare. Tom hovered near the kitchen, his hands restless, his eyes darting toward me. He must have sensed something, some undercurrent he couldn't name. I avoided his gaze, focusing on serving dishes, pouring drinks, keeping my movements steady. When everyone had filled their plates and the room buzzed with casual conversation, I cleared my throat. My hands trembled as I reached for the manila folder I'd placed on the sideboard. I held it to my chest for a moment, steadying my breath, then laid it flat on the table. "I asked you all here today," I began, my voice calm, "not just to share a meal, but to share the truth." The room quieted instantly. Forks clinked against plates, then stilled. Tom's eyes widened and Linda's smile faltered. I opened the folder and spread the contents out like playing cards. "These are receipts," I said, sliding one forward. From nights Tom told me he was working late. I pushed a photograph across the table. "This is his truck, parked outside a motel, the same one I've seen Linda drive to." My voice didn't waver, though my heart pounded in my ears. Gasps rippled around the table. Tom's mother covered her mouth with her hand. Linda's husband leaned forward, his face draining of color. Tom stammered, reaching for the papers, but I pulled them back. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to take this away. You don't get to lie anymore." Linda tried to speak, her voice trembling. "Margaret, this isn't." Don't I cut her off, my eyes locking with hers? "Don't you dare stand in my home at my table and pretend you haven't betrayed me." betrayed this child. I pressed a hand to my belly, feeling the weight of the life inside me. You both have done something cruel, something I will never forget. But I will not let you hide behind smiles and excuses any longer. The silence was suffocating. Faces around the table were pale, stunned, unable to find words. Linda's husband pushed back his chair and stood, his jaw tight. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Linda looked away, her mask crumbling. Tom's mother began to cry softly, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe her son capable of such betrayal. I stood tall, though. Inside, I trembled. For the first time, I felt powerful, not broken. They had taken so much from me already, my trust, my peace, but they would not take my dignity. Not anymore. "You may think you've destroyed me," I said, my voice steady, "but what you've really done is show me who I am without you. And I will never be the same." The table remained frozen, each person staring at the wreckage of truth scattered across the linen cloth. Linda's face was ashen. Tom's lips parted with words he couldn't form. Their masks had been torn away, and there was no hiding now. The dinner ended in pieces. Chairs scraped against the floor. Voices rose, and then silence settled in like heavy dust. Tom tried to follow me into the kitchen, but I held up my hand and told him not to. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply told him to leave, and for once he listened. He grabbed his jacket, muttered something no one could understand, and walked out the door. Linda tried to smooth things over her voice, high and nervous, but her husband cut her short. He told her to keep quiet and marched her out of my house without another word. When the door closed behind them, I stood there gripping the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. My brother placed a hand on my shoulder, but I shook my head. I didn't want comfort. Not yet. I wanted air. I wanted silence. I wanted to stand in the ruins of what they had done and feel every last ounce of it. The house was empty by nightfall. Dishes left untouched, food gone cold. I sat at the dining table with the evidence still spread out before me. It felt like a battlefield after the fight. Messy, painful, but strangely cleansing. I stared at the photographs, the receipts, the scribbled notes, and thought, this is who they are. This is what they chose. The days that followed were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. Tom stayed away. His mother called once, her voice heavy with shame, but I told her I wasn't ready to talk. Linda didn't call at all. I saw her once at the grocery store, standing in an aisle with her head down, pretending not to notice me. People whispered as I walked past, the way small towns always do when scandal touches one of their own. For the first time, I didn't shrink under it. Let them whisper. Let them know. I poured my energy into preparing for the baby. I painted the nursery pale yellow, refusing to let the bitterness seep into that room. I folded tiny clothes, set up the crib, and read books on motherhood, late into the night. Every time I felt my child move inside me, I found strength. The lies around me were heavy, but the truth I carried was heavier, and it was mine alone. Neighbors began stopping by, women from church, a few old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. They brought meals, helped me clean, and most importantly, they didn't ask too many questions. They just sat with me, knitting in silence or sipping tea, letting me feel less alone. Their quiet presence was a reminder that while betrayal had cut me deeply, it hadn't stripped me of all human kindness. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the porch with Mrs. Parker, my neighbor from 2 doors down. She was in her 70s, her hair white, her hands gnarled from years of work. She looked out across the yard and said, Margaret. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who break us hardest. But don't you forget you're still here. And that baby is proof that you've got more to fight for than ever. Her words sank deep. I realized then that my story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about survival, about rebirth. Tom tried to come back once. He showed up at the door a week after the dinner, his face tired, his clothes wrinkled. He said he wanted to explain that things had gotten out of hand, that he'd made a mistake. I listened, my arms folded across my chest. He talked about stress, about loneliness, about how Linda understood him in ways I didn't. Every excuse only made the hole he'd dug deeper. When he finished, I shook my head. "You didn't just betray me," I told him, my voice calm. "You betrayed our child. You betrayed the very life we built together, and no apology will make me forget that." He begged to stay, but I closed the door. I leaned against it, trembling, tears threatening to spill. But I didn't open it again. That was the moment I realized I was stronger than I had ever known. Weeks passed, and the gossip around town quieted. People found new stories, new scandals. But I was still here, rebuilding myself one piece at a time. I started thinking about work again, about finding something to support myself once the baby came. My brother helped me go through finances, and together we came up with a plan. It wasn't easy, but it was doable. Slowly, I felt myself changing. The pain hadn't vanished, it probably never would, but it no longer ruled me. In its place was something steadier, resolve. I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning again. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, I sat in the nursery, rocking gently in the chair by the window. I whispered to my baby, telling them about the world waiting outside, a world that wasn't always fair, but was still worth living in. And I promised them this, that we would build a life together filled with honesty, strength, and love. Tom and Linda had stolen so much from me, but they hadn't destroyed me. In their betrayal, they had unknowingly given me the greatest gift: freedom. The freedom to rebuild, to redefine myself, to rise above them. And as I sat there, hand on my belly, I felt something powerful stir inside me. Not just the baby's kick, but a rebirth of my own. The seasons turned, and with them, so did my heart. Autumn brought cool winds and the smell of burning leaves in the distance. Winter followed, covering the sidewalks of Maple Street in a quiet hush of snow. Through it all, I carried my child, growing heavier, more determined with each passing day. By the time spring arrived, I was no longer the woman who had once cried herself to sleep over a motel receipt. I was Margaret Sullivan, wiser, tougher, reborn. The baby came on a rainy April morning. Labor was long and hard, but when I heard that first cry, the world tilted back into place. I held my daughter against my chest, her tiny fists balled tight, her breath warm against my skin, and I wept. Not for the past, but for the future. For the life we were about to begin together. I named her Grace. Because after all the pain, all the lies, it felt like grace was what had carried me through. I thought of Tom that day. I wondered if he even knew his daughter had been born. He hadn't been in touch since the night I shut the door in his face. I didn't reach out either. The birth certificate carried only my name and hers. She was mine, fully and completely. As for Linda, I hadn't seen her in months. Rumors swirled that her marriage had crumbled, that she was living with her sister in another town. But by then, I no longer cared. Their choices had cost them everything. And me, I had everything I needed right in my arms. In the months that followed, I found strength I didn't know I had. The sleepless nights, the endless feedings, the mountain of responsibilities. There were moments I thought I couldn't keep going. But then Grace would grip my finger with her tiny hand, or smile in her sleep, and suddenly, I had more than enough. Every hardship became a reminder that I had survived worse. I had survived betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak. I could survive this too. Neighbors stepped in when they could. Mrs. Parker rocked Grace so I could shower. My brother mowed the lawn, fixed the leaky sink, brought groceries when money was tight. The kindness of others filled the cracks left by those who had hurt me. I learned that while betrayal often comes from the people closest to us, healing can come from the most unexpected places. As Grace grew, so did I. I found work managing the office of a local mechanics shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and it gave me back a sense of independence. Each paycheck reminded me that I was standing on my own 2 feet, building a future that didn't rely on anyone else's promises. Sometimes, when I walked through town, I still caught whispers. People remembered, of course. They always do. But I carried myself differently now. I wasn't ashamed. If anything, I was proud. Proud that I hadn't let their lies define me. Proud that I had turned the ugliest chapter of my life into the foundation of something stronger. And every now and then when someone asked about Grace's father, I'd smile softly and say, "She has all the love she needs." Because she did. Looking back, I realized the betrayal hadn't destroyed me. It had remade me. It had forced me to see who I was without the masks of others, without leaning on false friends or unfaithful husbands. I had discovered that strength doesn't come from being untouched by pain. It comes from walking through fire and refusing to let it burn you down. So if you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever sat alone in the dark wondering how you'll ever move forward, let me tell you this: you can. You can rise. You can rebuild. You can find grace in the rubble. My story isn't about revenge in the way most people think. I didn't burn down houses. I didn't scream in the streets. My revenge was quieter, but it cut deeper. I lived. I thrived. I raised my child with dignity and love while they were left to choke on the ashes of their own choices. That, to me, is the truest form of justice. And now, as I sit here years later, Grace asleep in her bed, I find myself grateful. Not for the betrayal, no, but for the strength it revealed in me, for the freedom it forced upon me, and for the lesson it carved into my heart. The day their faces turned pale was the day I was reborn, and sometimes the greatest revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's simple. It's living well with your head held high and your heart unbroken. If this story speaks to you, if you've ever been broken but found a way to stand again, I hope you'll share it. Somewhere out there, another woman is sitting in her kitchen, holding a truth too heavy to bear. Maybe she needs to hear that survival is possible, that betrayal is not the end, that grace can be found on the other side of heartbreak. Thank you for walking with me through this chapter of my life. And if you believe in justice and dignity, and in the quiet strength of women who refuse to be erased, I invite you to stay with me for the next story. The end.